Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 161 today. And I am here with my guest, Anna Chen. How are you doing today, Anna?
Hi, not too bad. It's coming up to midwinter. Winter is coming, as we all know.
Yeah, it
I'm
is. Mm.
I'm just getting over a bout of COVID as well, so I'm taking it nice and easy today.
Yeah. You've been telling me you've had COVID for a long, long time now. That's not very good.
Um, we got our first bout of COVID late 2019, so the official dates are just, are not right. But after that, we loved one and I, we wore our masks, we shielded, and we kept it at bay. Then I let my guard down earlier in the year, and on the 4th of August, the dreaded double pink stripe across the test, and we were positive. And it's like, I think I got a heavier viral load because it was like being drunk, this lack of balance, lack of coordination, finding it very hard to think. And I don't know if you can hear my breathing is quite laboured now. So walking up one flight of stairs and talking and carrying something moderately heavy, I'm out of breath at the top. I'm getting slowly better. So I think I'm hoping I'm not going to join the people who have long COVID, because that's just pretty dreadful. But I've been following the UK COVID inquiry. I don't know if you know all the stuff that's been coming out of there, which is pretty.
What has been some of the big finds in the COVID inquiry in the UK that people should know about?
Well, apart from the horrors of having Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, who was the health minister, being interviewed, and just hearing what a shambles that was, what I've gotten from this, because they had the COVID inquiry last year, and there's another round of hearings this year. And some of the stuff that's been coming out September and October from the scientists is just alarming. You have the managers, the people who wrote the guidelines, the people who've been honoured by the government, basically doing what the government wanted them to do, insisting that the virus is not airborne, insisting that there is no difference between the baggy blue surgical masks and the good PPE, the FFP2, FFP3 and N95 masks. So much evidence was coming out. The alarming thing was this difference between airborne and droplets. I hadn't realized how important this is, this differentiation, that we knew that SARS-CoV-2, the COVID virus, was airborne because the first SARS-1, was designated and classified as airborne, so they should have had the PPE that was effective at blocking this. So what they did was they changed it in March. Everybody, the WHO, the IPC, which is the British body, the officials who write the guidelines, suddenly said this isn't airborne, it's droplets. And the difference is droplets act ballistically, so they're the ones that just go about within 6 feet and then they drop to the ground under the force of gravity. If it's airborne, it means it's in the air, it's fine particles that you're breathing in. So what this does is, if it's droplets, the other thing is it means that instead of institutions and the government having to deal with, to cope with this, it now puts the onus on individuals to guard against. So instead of having clean air, which is what the implications are, if you're saying this is airborne, which we now know from all the science and the scientists who've given evidence that it is, it means in schools, in hospitals, in all public places, you have to have clean air. In Westminster, the government, they have state-of-the-art air scrubbers and filters, but they won't do this in schools. So, of course, a lot of children are falling ill, dying. We know now that it's not just a respiratory disease, that it attacks the entire system. And only last week, there's a new paper that came out that said the proteins from the virus, so you can get rid of the virus, be virus free, but the proteins from it build up in the junction between the spine and the brain, and basically it's there continuing to do damage. So you hear of a lot of people having blood diseases, heart diseases, thrombosis, the immune system. COVID is like HIV in slow-mo. So what it's doing is it's attacking your T cells, it's attacking the immune system, so that every time you get it, you're not strengthening your immune system, it's getting weakened. The other thing is you've got a class war basically between business corporate interests who want everyone to catch it. They came up with this herd immunity. They don't use the term herd immunity anymore, but it's there effectively, herd immunity, and the public health. So you've got people like the Chief Medical Officer, Sir Patrick Vallance here, who was saying on the 13th of March 2020, yes, everyone's got to get it. 60% of the population have to catch COVID in order for us to have a herd immunity. Now, the thing about herd immunity is you don't really want that anyway. But with measles, and the reason you don't want to just say that everyone gets infected is because there's always a proportion of people who get ill and die. So with measles, it does work because the virus, it mutates so slowly. You can meet the same measles virus decades after you first had it. So your immune system is sharpened up. It is going to be able to deal with that. The problem with COVID is we know from all the variants, we know it mutates. It mutates at such a fast rate that you're getting a different virus every time you get it. So instead of you already having your immune system set up to deal with that and clobber it, it's just having to start all over again. And that's why we're getting mass illness that the media just won't talk about.
No, they won't talk about it, and it's very good you're figuring that out, Anna. Anna, for you as a person who has long COVID, in your opinion, what do you say to all of those people, like those really hard out anti-conspirators who say that COVID doesn't exist, that it's completely made up, the virus doesn't exist and stuff like that, and that COVID, won't affect you bad at all? What do you say to those people? And what has it been like for you having long-term COVID? Like, what has it been like for you experiencing
I'm hoping that I have longish COVID and not long COVID because I got it at the beginning of August. I can feel I'm already better than I was. So I think I may have dodged a bullet there. But I would say to people who are still insisting that it's a hoax, it's like, who gains? Cui bono? You have to ask, where did this come from? Who are the people who are saying this? And that was Trump's first reaction. Do you remember?
Yeah.
He said it's a hoax.
He actually did say that. He did.
He literally said that it's recorded. He was saying it everywhere. He played it down. He delayed action. He held super spreader rallies.
Yeah.
The opposite of what China was doing. So he did this for months. Now, Trump was actually briefed on the 28th of January, 2020 by his own NSA. And they said, this is really dangerous. This is serious. And they explained to him. Even earlier than that, in November 2019, the Pentagon had briefed NATO and Israel, and people can Google this. You can do a search for this. They briefed NATO and Israel that this was happening, that there is a pandemic about to hit the world, but they didn't warn China. They didn't tell China. Now, don't you think that?
Anna, sorry for interrupting, but I wanted to ask a question here. So we're getting into that bit. So in your page, you talk about the COVID pandemic timeline and the articles. So tell us about, like, in your opinion, how you see when the pandemic started and from your timeline of articles, and Do you think do you think that the COVID pandemic didn't actually come from China? It actually came from America. And what connections do you know that has to the Fort Delta lab or something that's in America? Go ahead.
Well, I haven't come up with a definitive origin for this, but I'll put this to you, that Trump had already begun a war on China with his trade war. China didn't buckle, if you remember. It was compromising, and they're supposed to have come to various deals, but it wasn't brought to its knees in the way that Trump seemed to want it to. Then you had in 2019 suddenly these riots erupt in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah, 2019. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And these are backed by NED, the National Endowment of Democracy. So we know there's a lot of foreign American interference there. We also know that the UK is part of this because the governor, the last governor of Hong Kong, not democratically elected, he's appointed Governor Chris Patten. We know that he was mentoring Joshua Wong. So he wrote the foreword to Joshua Wong, you know, who's one of the leaders of the rioters. You know, Joshua Wong and his fellow rioters were also welcomed in Washington. We know this. So it's America and Britain trying to destabilize Hong Kong. And then you get, during that year, there were a spate of viruses that were hitting China's agriculture. I don't know where that came from. I'm just saying it's a coincidence. You had about six viruses that were affecting China.
And Anna, also here it mentions, you point out, this is a very important thing. It also mentions about there was something found in Spain in a Spanish sewer, like in March 2019.
I mean, really telling, yeah. If you look at what was happening in America in 2019, you had the mysterious vaping deaths. The X-rays from those vaping deaths that they've never explained are the same glassification as you get with the worst, the early COVID cases. So these X-rays are almost identical. So that needs further investigation. You know, I can't say that's definitively COVID, but until we have a proper investigation, you know, we just don't know. Now, for me, one of the most telling things is that in December 2019 and January 2020, there are a load of several thousand blood samples taken by the Red Cross across America. It's just a standard thing that they do this. When those samples were examined, 106 of them were found to be antigen positive, which means it had been, you know, it was the result of being in contact with COVID. And when you work it back, statisticians have worked it back and said, well, this indicates an initial infection in August. Now, the thing is, they were earlier samples, so that's December. What about the ones that were taken in November and October? They won't examine those. We also know that the first COVID death in America, a woman, Cookie Brown, was something like the 9th of January in Kansas, and that's the same date as the first death in China. So these timelines, there's also somebody who I'm in touch with on Twitter. He keeps putting up this timeline. He says the origin is actually earlier than the one in China. So I think my view at the moment, until I'm otherwise persuaded, is that China was the first to identify, because they're very health conscious. You know, Asians are very health conscious anyway. So they were the first to identify and understand that there was something going wrong, that this virus, this strange pneumonia, was a novel coronavirus. And of course, we know that by about the 11th of January, they had identified it and sequenced it and shared it with the rest of the world, which is why all the vaccine companies were able to pounce on this and to come up with their vaccines. Although I will say, I am very pro-vaccine, but I will give the anti-vaxxers this: the mRNA vaccine is not like the traditional
Mm.
vaccine. They're different methods. I want the traditional Novavax here. You can't get it for love nor money. We're left with Pfizer and BioNTech, and we know that Ursula von der Leyen in the EU has done some weird deal with Pfizer, because this was a scandal. You know, she's lucky she didn't get prosecuted, so people can look further into that, you know, more deeply and see what happened there. So I think the statistics I have seen, the research I've seen into mRNA is it is actually safer to take mRNA than to have COVID. The best thing of all, if you really don't want the mRNA, is you have to block COVID. And the only way to do that is to use masks, to quarantine, to have clean air. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that a virus is not complete DNA, it's RNA. And what this means is that it requires a host in order to replicate itself. So if you starve it of hosts by quarantining and wearing masks that block it, eventually it dies off because it doesn't have the host. You're not giving it the hosts. This is what they did in China. So on day 43 of a 76-day lockdown, they managed to get it down to 0. I'm getting a lot of background noise. Can you hear me okay, Welsh?
Yeah, I can. Your mic is acting a bit, issue, or is it coming from my end?
I think it's coming from your end because this has been fine. It's just the one that's in the Mac.
Is that better?
Yes, that's gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, was something new.
Keep saying what you're saying.
Yeah. So did you hear all that, or is that too?
It's got yeah, I did hear. You were mentioning about the Wuhan and all that stuff, how China dealt with the.
Well, the important thing for people to remember is that the virus is not complete DNA like a bacterium is. So it can't exist on its own. It needs a host. The whole thing about a virus is it needs a host in order to survive and in order to reproduce itself. If you don't give it hosts by putting someone in quarantine and wearing masks and obviously socially distancing, cleaning the air, having HEPA filters, you eventually kill off the virus. Now, we got near to that in Britain. We had this lockdown, which started too late because, again, you've got business and corporate interests and political interests trying to stop us locking down. When we did lock down, that first time in Britain, we got very near to 0 COVID. And mysteriously, you had these voices piping up, trying to force us to open. So we opened too early. If we'd have been locked down for, say, another week, two weeks maximum, that would have got it down to zero COVID, and we would just have been left with having to firefight the various flare-ups. Instead, it's spread everywhere. Just about everyone's had it. And can I say, anyone who's managed to avoid it, you're so lucky. Keep it up. You really need to do that, because you're going to be the new I don't know, the new breed of superhumans, because you haven't got this thing working away in your system, attacking all your organs.
Yeah, I know what you mean by that. What do you think about, like, you also mentioned about how COVID, was weaponized too, about how it was weaponized. Explain to that too.
Well, when I first heard about it at the end of 2019, you could see everyone was in a panic. They were trying to deal with it. There were various degrees of efficiency. But after the 20th of January, when Zhong Nanshan said to the world, this is serious, there is human-to-human transmission, and he explained the seriousness of it. And then 3 days later, Wuhan had that the famous unprecedented lockdown. You had this this contrary action in the West, in America, and here in Britain. Not in Italy. The first reactions across Europe were really good, but in Britain and in America, they seem to want to spread it. So what happened in 2017 when Trump won the 2016 election? In 2017, Obama took him through they had a pandemic team that he'd set up. So they showed them how to, what it was about, showed him the toy box. We'll never know. We'll probably never find out what was in the toy box. So what happened shortly after was Trump dismantled the pandemic team. John Bolton, who was the head of the NSA at that time, took the coronavirus into his own weapons of mass destruction division within the NSA. They sacked, I think his name Bossert, who was actually the Republican. Trump, the Republicans were going to replace the Democratic head of the pandemic team with this guy Bossert. So it was their choice. He ended up getting sacked, and also this guy Zima ended up getting sacked, and it was all mysteriously brought in under John Bolton's control. So I don't know. You tell me what happened there. But you had the pandemic team that was dismantled. They also closed down the CDC office in Beijing, and that was set up there originally because in the tropics in China, you get, in places like that, and in Africa, you do get lots of viruses developing. So the world together is supposed to be looking at this, monitoring it, keeping an eye on it to save the world. So all of that, all our defences were shut down. In the UK, in 2019, Boris Johnson, he's elected June. The following month, what does he do? He follows suit. He closes down the UK pandemic team as well. And there's a whole load of stuff as well that's coming out from the COVID inquiry. How they ran down the PPE. We just had absolutely no defences. We were left to this. And then you had Patrick Vallance, the chief medical officer, saying that we all had to catch this virus. They're now trying to rehabilitate him, and various voices are trying to deny that he ever said that. But I've got the transcript and the video of the interview that he gave to Sky News, and also the BBC he did as well. This is all on my pages, on my pandemic pages at my website, annachen.co.uk, because I've been keeping an eye on this since 2020. It was the responses, instead of just being able to say, oh great, the professionals are dealing with this, government and science, they'll sort it out, we'll be okay. You suddenly saw this really alarming behavior that's just coming out. Healthcare workers here in the UK are absolutely furious at the way I'm sorry, it's this reclassification of it as airborne, as droplets instead of airborne, based on no science at all. There is no scientific evidence for them to do this. It's all politics. So yeah, when you ask about weaponization, I would say it's all in there. It all needs to be untangled, but there are so many contradictions and so many of these events. But unfortunately, it's all being deflected and diverted into all these conspiracies. And I think you have to look at the very basics. Why did they not deal with this as a public health issue? Why were these competing interests, the big pharma? Why suddenly did they have this input? Why were scientists being sidelined?
Exactly, you're right there. Anna, speaking about COVID, I was just wondering to you, so explain to me your career, your like, how did you get into like journalism and becoming a TV host for the BBC? Tell us about your background in that.
Well, it's quite interesting because I was born in Hackney, which was at that time was one of the poorest boroughs in Europe. So I've got a white mother, white English mother, and a Chinese father. So that was interesting. So, I think of it as being born with a foot in each of two major cultures, two major systems. So I was able, I was looking at both all the time that I was growing up. I don't know. I was just always expressive. I always wrote poetry. I always wanted to do things like dance, painting. I was an artist. There weren't many Chinese people around at that time. You had a generation that had come in the 50s and 60s and were running takeaways, and they were mostly from Hong Kong, Canton. So I was the only Chinese girl in my school. I think there was a girl when I was in the first year. There was a girl in the fourth year who was an artist as well, and that was it. So I always felt on the margins, but in a good way, because I think I was being born at a time when, if you were different, it was actually quite welcomed in many ways. And that's a healthy society, I think, that looks at difference and actually wants to absorb it. So you had poetry from across the world, music from across the world, different philosophies, different religions. It was a fantastic playground. If you were interested in the world at that time, it was a fantastic creative time to be born and to live in. I was just always writing, so it was just natural that I would sort of, get into this. I was employed, I was acting with a theatre company called Mulan in the 90s. And I was telling the guy who ran it, Glenn Gui, at the time, about my views of the way Chinese were regarded, because I thought it was very dangerous that the yellow peril stereotypes that were still deeply embedded in our Western culture, it was almost like they were sitting there dormant, ready to be triggered. So I was very aware that we were a blank canvas on which any malign forces, dominant forces could write the narrative and describe who we are. So I was very aware of that, because the only Chinese people or Asian people who you saw in the culture were sidekicks, were very you had to be submissive and a lotus blossom if you're a woman, or you were a dragon lady if you had any sort of brain. And for the guys, it was weird desexualization. And even Bruce Lee, the wonderful Bruce Lee, he had to play the chauffeur sidekick in The Green Hornet. So we were never authors of ourselves. We were never in the forefront. We were never humanized and seen as rounded human beings. And I thought, well, this isn't right, is it? So that's why my, in poetry and all the stuff I was doing, I thought it was very important to show that, well, we do exist. Anyway, Glenn Gui and Mulan loved the idea of Susie Wrong that I'd written, so he decided to promote that, and we ended up taking this show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is a very prestigious event once a year. And it's the first time that, a Chinese person had done that, had dismantled the stereotypes. So I just ran through all the Chinese women stereotypes and basically, literally took a gun to them, because I had a blow-up sex doll that was filled with K-pop to make it look as if it was a blow-up doll. And somebody had found a pump action shotgun which held about 12 ping pong balls. So we stuffed that down the back of the blow up doll with the muzzle coming out of the business end. And when it got to the climax of this theatre piece, I just shoot down the audience, and they loved it. And we got a lot of press from doing that. But what it had done was it had put down a marker for Chinese people. So this is the 30th anniversary this year of doing that. So I was pleased with that, and I just kept building on that. I was asked to present some radio programs, ended up writing stuff. So this very talented producer asked me, at Culture Wise, asked me if, to get involved with this 10-part Chinese in Britain series that they were doing for Radio 4. And it was very interesting, helping with the research, doing that, and looking at the Chinese who had come to Britain. From the first who we could document was Shenfu Song, who was a Jesuit priest at the end of the 17th century. So I can't remember, it was 16 something that he tours Europe. He comes to Britain. James II is on the throne, who was a Catholic. Really falls in love with this guy who was so charming. He didn't speak English, they didn't speak Chinese, but everyone spoke Latin, so they could communicate in that way. He also helped the Oxford Bodleian Library translate all their books. So, and at that time, no one even knew which way to hold up a book, and they were getting it all wrong, holding it upside down and so forth. So he managed to pass on a lot of skills, a lot of information there. So that's very positive. So it all starts off well, and then gradually with each wave, they sort of get more and more diminished by the West. And of course, in the 19th century, beginning of the 1830s, when you get the first Opium War, because Britain didn't have anything to sell to China. China was technologically advanced, probably the most advanced country in the world at that point. They had porcelain, they had hydraulics, we know about the gunpowder, paper money. They had the seed drill 2,000 years before Jethro Tull invented it here in the 18th century in Britain. So there was a lot, but unfortunately by that point they'd become quite isolated, and they didn't particularly want to have much to do with the outside world, which was, a big downside of the Qing dynasty. Britain wanted to sell our wares in China. The empress said, no, we don't want your clockwork doodads, we don't want your rough wool. We've got silk, we've got all these things. The first plastic, lacquer, So, of course, we still, in Britain, we still wanted their tea and their silks and their porcelain. But in order to pay for it, it's emptying the treasury. So we're not only using our gold bullion to pay for it. China doesn't want gold, it wants silver. So the added expense of having a middleman, European middlemen, who put on their percentage, didn't help matters. So eventually we got the Opium Wars, when the East India Company and others, the narco-capitalists, realized, well, we can force them to take opium, because they were selling opium to help the balance of trade. Lin Zexu, eventually, the Commissioner Lin Zexu eventually says, no, we have laws against opium, you can't sell it here. And he takes a load of the opium and destroys it with lime and seawater. And by the way, this is interesting, because when I took this show in 2012, I took the Steampunk Opium Wars we toured it, including the Royal Maritime Museum in Greenwich, in the belly of the beast. And nobody knew about it. This is 2012. Nobody in the audience, an educated audience, knew about the Opium Wars. So Lin Zexu destroys it. He doesn't burn it, which a lot of people thought at the time, were saying, all these books saying, oh, he burnt it. No, for obvious reasons. If you burn a load of heroin, a load of opium, what happens to the people standing around who are inhaling it? So obviously, that's not how they destroyed it. But anyway, and that kicked off the Opium Wars, and Europe ravaging China, which we're now getting again. A second lot of opium wars is shaping up by the West, who have nothing to offer. Now they're in late capitalism and everything is imploding. So they want to kill the golden goose and loot it and pillage it because they have nothing. And meanwhile, the rest of us, human beings, are suffering.
I wanted to ask you, explain to us about the Shakedown Timeline of America's 21st Century War on China.
Oh, well, this is interesting because I've been writing a long time and keeping tabs on stuff. I've been watching this develop. I take it back. I mean, there's always been this eagerness to carve up China by the West. But this latest wave, I take back to 1997, when the UK has to give back Hong Kong that it had taken, as part of the Opium Wars in this very unfair treaty. It gets to the end of this lease, and it gives it back to China. Both Thatcher and I'm so sorry, I can't remember his name, but they signed this. They signed this accord, and the final 6 words are, well, Hong Kong will enjoy autonomy except in foreign and defence affairs. And when the hawks are arguing, they always leave out those final 6 words. It was always anything to do with foreign affairs, anything to do with defence, that comes under China. Because, of course, by now, Hong Kong is legally part of China. And everything since then has been the bitterness of Britain, because we know they didn't like being kicked out. King Charles, or Prince Charles as he was then, and Governor Patton were very, very angry. They called the Chinese dinosaurs. For British royalty to call China dinosaurs, I think is quite rich. So everything has been sort of mischief, throughout to try and destabilize. Now, under the Republicans, although when George Bush Jr., George W. Bush got in, there was a lot of noise that they're also very aggressive towards China. It eventually settled into this. There was an equilibrium that they hit. So Clinton welcomes China into the WTO, wins that to 2001. W. Bush gets in 2000, so the WTO is about 2001. And despite all the grr, all the aggressive language, everything seems to settle to and gets balanced. Then you start to get, in 2010, there's the Copenhagen COP15, the climate change summit, where a young Obama he's been elected in 2008. He inherits the awful America's Great Crash, the greed-induced Great Crash, which threatens to bring down the global economic system. China comes to the rescue, pulls them out of it by allowing, among other things, allowing the global currencies to devalue against the yuan. China buys up a load of American debt. It gets its own new huge middle class to buy stuff, to stimulate consumption. So China comes to the rescue and it balances the world economy. It saves the world. But because no good deed goes unpunished, they suddenly you get Obama turning on China. And I take this back to COP15, to the summit, the climate change summit, because that's when Britain starts dripping poison in his ear. Obama, who didn't know diddly squat about China, he comes into COP15. He's going to be the hero who saves the world from climate change. Instead, you get this Danish treaty. Again, this is something to look up. The Danish treaty, which is basically a stitch up of the poorer third world global south. They get caught out. Obama is humiliated. And from then on in, you just get this pivot to Asia, and it seems that he takes it on himself not to help his, black people who are suffering, and working class people who are suffering in America, but he just directs all his energy into gathering Western forces to have a go at China. So I've got this timeline on my website, Shakedown, a timeline of America's 21st century war on China, and it basically documents a lot of the stepping stones in this path. And I'm writing stuff like, say, for example, covering COP15 in 2009 and saying, is it my imagination? Oh, so 2010, is it my imagination, or is Obama turning on China? And then, of course, you get Hillary Clinton, who writes this manifesto for taking over the Central European Eurasia landmass, continuation of the Great Game that's gone on under British Empire for century or more. They also decide that America's going to own what they call the Western Pacific, but of course is the South China Sea and the off the coast of China, that whole island chain, that's now going to be completely under American control, because although it's Japan, and Japan takes over the Ryukyu Islands, and you've got Okinawa there and everything, then you've got Taiwan. It's a whole island chain that is fencing in China. If you look at a map of this, you can see, oh, it's literally a chain. So you have this upturn in America's imperial ambitions when it comes to China. And there's China just, saying, look, we just make things, we want to be proud of ourselves. They spend hardly anything on military, for example. We know that America spends as much on its military as the next 9 nations put together. So now that China has had to raise its military game, it's like America's saying, oh, look, you're being aggressive, for building defenses against what is obviously aggression. I mean, it's only in the last week, isn't it, that Germany has sailed 2 warships in between Taiwan and China's coast. And because it's one China, everyone's agreed, for the last 20 years or more, that it's one China. Really, since Nixon Kissinger, so it's like 50 years. What one China, and legally this means that any strait between the mainland and part of its territory is not international waters. And yet you've got British warships going through there, American, subs and warships going through there. And now you've got Germany, and it's going straight back to the 19th century opium wars, when they all ganged up on it to carve it up. The fortunes they made from China and from India as well are what financed our industrial revolutions.
So, in all of your knowledge, Anna, that you've done when studying about China and its history, what would you say is the one thing that fascinates you about China's political system when comparing it to the West?
Oh, there are so many. I think it's interesting that they're having to tread this. It's a tightrope walk, isn't it, between capitalism and I mean, what they've done for their own people. It is incredible. I mean, I can remember stories of when I was a kid of, Chinese people still living in pigsties. You'd see the picture of this utter poverty. I mean, rags isn't even in it. The starvation, all the things that were going wrong because there was this trade embargo from the West. That just worsened the famines that they had there. But now there were mistakes made, but now you've got over 800 million people raised from absolute poverty. That's unprecedented. That's never happened in the world before, because if you compare it, say, with India, and both China and India sort of started off around the the same, after the Second World War. You see what China has actually managed to do. The middle class, they've got this huge middle class that's about, 550 million, which is more than the population of America, which is about 380 million. You look at the infrastructure, the beautiful cities, they're like, it's like science fiction, what they're doing. You've got people very happy. Even Pew Research, Western Harvard, the research that they've done in China that shows something like, 95% of Chinese people are really happy with their lot. But you compare that with what's happened in America or Britain, and you can see we're absolutely imploding, and we're getting this absolute rubbish character assassination that's going on. It's like, the Brits were conned into Brexit because it was a way of damaging the third bloc, the Europe bloc. So there's just been so much damage that's been done. But I'm proud of China. I'm proud of my Chinese heritage, my Chinese side.
What would you say you study, what do you feel like when a lot of people say that China is an authoritarian country and it's a dictatorship, especially in its political system, which a lot of people accuse China of?
What, compared to here or America? If you want to look at authoritarian, I mean, it is just incredible. You've got a press here now that is absolutely supine, and all you get is the American, is the American narrative. In America, that's per capita, that's the biggest prison population in the world. Here in Britain, we had more CCTVs per capita than anywhere else in the world, and China only overtook us because Mitt Romney and Bain Capital actually installed all those CCTVs. It's like, you're accusing China of having all this surveillance, but hold on, you did that, you financed it, and you enabled that. You don't get cop killings there, killings by cops, as you do in America. I mean, 2019, when they were trying to drum up this hysteria about, the authoritarianism, so-called, in Hong Kong, that year there was something like 1,014 civilians in America shot by cops, and like 0 in China and Hong Kong.
Yeah. And it's in Hong Kong, they were also saying about how the police are bad. Especially in Hong Kong, when you had a lot of the rioters smashing up buildings. I was in Hong Kong. I wasn't in Hong Kong, but from my experience before, I used to be anti-China, but but seeing what the Hong Kong protesters did really changed my opinion on China. That was really what changed it, because Anna, when I was watching that, I was thinking to myself, something's off about this. This is wrong. And then I see these supporters going around smashing up buildings, because I looked at the other side of the story, and the pro-Chinese people were they were very, very good. They were very supportive. They were very lovely. They weren't going around smashing up buildings, breaking bricks, doing fire bombs somewhere like that. It was
You know what scared me at that time, because I was, initially it's like, oh, there are people demonstrating, and your sympathy sort of goes to protesters. I mean, mine tends to. And then all these videos were coming out of mostly women and elderly men being beaten up absolutely savagely. The guy who had petrol poured over him and was...
Yes, that was in Tunjung area. Lantau?
Right. I mean, we only saw that video because people were putting it on Twitter. It wasn't shown here in the West. When The Guardian showed it, they stopped it before the point where the ignition happened. And it's the old guy, the janitor, the 70-year-old janitor who was bricked in the head and killed by them as well. And then you had all of the petrol bomb factory that was in the university. This is terrorism, and there was the Guardian journalist who was walking around saying, "Oh, this is marvelous, absolutely, we love it that they're doing this." And it's like, are you crazy? This is Hong Kong is doing so well. During British colonialism, of course, there were no elections. You have awful living accommodation that's there. The tycoons were making an absolute fortune, not putting anything back into its people, a bit like in America, where you've got more and more profits being siphoned off by the ruling class, and nothing being put back into the people who are, living on the streets. They're having to have 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, the homelessness and all that. So you have this nation that is coming up, that is just doing so well for its own people. And they're being trash talked by the West. In the meantime, we are being fobbed off, being told, oh, it's immigrants' faults, or it's the fault of Muslims, or it's now evil China or Russia. And all the time, our standard of living is absolutely plummeting and imploding. But profits, of course, went up. The oligarchs, like Jeff Bezos, I think his income doubled. I think for some of them it tripled during COVID, for example. None of that. Why isn't that being taxed and the money being put back into the economy? They won't do that. It's all look over there.
Pretty much, yeah. Anna, before we finish up this show, how do you see the world going forward? And what is your opinion for the world for the next 6 years? What do you think is going to happen with America under Trump's, under his second administration? Even though, how Trump's being very pro-Israel, and how he probably would want to go to war with Iran because the bankers will probably tell him to. Know how he's going to try and do the Great Israel Project, and knowing how they're going to try and bring in the Anti-Semitic Act in America. And what do you think what do you think the world's going to look forward with China and Russia leading the way with the more multipolar world and the decline of the West?
I think there's going to have to be this big split, because it's like everything that's thrown at China, these trade wars and technology wars, China does better and better. It's almost like the more pressure you put on China, the more it brings out its potential. I think in America, I think Trump's not going to be happy until there is a Trump Tower on Gaza Beach. I just feel so sorry for the Palestinians. It's quite clear what's happening to them. And you get the Western media just performing these gymnastics and contorting themselves to try and put forward a narrative that makes this acceptable, what is happening. You've got a ruling elite in the West that's sheared off from its ordinary people. I said ages ago, I said in 2018, I said, I think what we're seeing now is the 1930s coming back. I think BRICS, it's such a great idea, because what they're trying to do, of course, is trying to detach from the USS Titanic, which is going down and being as destructive as possible as it goes down. And they're trying to maneuver so that they can, China is our lifeboat, is the global lifeboat. And for Britain to be torpedoing this country, because remember, I was saying about Brexit. So we were fooled into voting for Brexit on the promise, and even Farage was saying this, we can do these amazing trade deals with China. And as the minute we got Brexit, it's like, oh no, you don't want to have anything to do with China. We've managed to damage Europe. Now we're going to damage China. So in 2017, it was so exciting. The first freight train all the way from China traveled all the way across Europe and ended up embarking in London, in East London. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. It's the whole of Eurasia now. We're all one big family. And of course, who didn't like this? America. So that's when we got the concerted effort after that to carve up China and to carve up Eurasia. So I don't know. I think it's going to be horrible for us living in the West. I hope for anybody who's living in Australia and New Zealand, because you're actually part of Asia, I really hope that common sense prevails and you manage to pull out of this orbit that's just so damaging and stick with Asia, because all the potential is in Asia. And then it's going to be Africa, so
And Russia too. Don't forget Russia too.
yeah,
Russia too.
it's such a rich region. I mean, Russia is enormous. It's they saved our bacon in World War II from the fascists, and now for NATO to go right up to their doorstep and keep poking. You go right up close and you're up, and you start poking the bear. What do you think is going to happen? So I don't know. I think it's going to be bad for us living here in the UK and in America. Oh my gosh. I think America's I think it's going to be a lot of civil unrest. It's like The Time Machine. If anyone's seen the 1960 film The Time Machine with the Morlocks and the Eloi, the Morlocks are the troglodyte ex-humanity who is cannibalizing the Eloi and driving them into these cattle pens. That's very much, I think, the template for us. That and the Omega Man with Charlton Heston. What happens with the demagogues who take over and use religion and the bomb? That's incredible. That's what we've got now, and that's a 1960s, 1970s movie that's predicting that. So those of you who are living way away from where we are here, I think ultimately it's looking good for you guys. If you don't let the demagogues take over and you remember to love each other, not to be atomized, humanity is just such an amazing thing, an entity. Just keep it going, keep breathing life into it, and don't let the buggers grind you down.
Anna, before we go, I just want to talk to you about that post I shared with you from Generation X Girl. Shout out to her about how there is a bill, as we all know, how Trump is like going to be the most pro-Israel even though he was in his first term, and
Yeah.
how there's the anti-Semitic bill which is going to be potentially passing the Senate on December the 20th, and not to mention how the Israel lobby in America, because how Israel's getting exposed and their war, and the Zionists and the elite are getting exposed for all the crimes they've done against humanity. What is your opinion of there potentially of there being an anti-Semitic act that is going to destroy the Constitution of America and turn America, hang on, from the United States of Israel to the United States of Israel on steroids? What is your opinion on that? The fact that free Palestine could become illegal to say on college campuses and say in America, and basically criticizing a genocide where millions of kids are being killed, one of the worst genocides in history, could become illegal.
Well, it's like something out of a dystopian novel. Who'd have thought that America would come to this? We have to remember that not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jews. I feel as if Jewish religion and ethnicity has been hijacked by the interests of decaying capitalism in the West. And the idea now that, that in the land of free speech, you can't even criticize.
But the question is, has America ever been the land of the free? I don't think so.
It hasn't, but there have been fantastic explosions of spirit in America. The civil rights movement. Yeah, you can say during that time, that's when Dulles and the CIA were coming to the fore. Look what happened to JFK. Look what they did to the Black Panthers. But you had a very healthy movement. The spirit of America was on the side of genuine free speech and free spirits.
And let's not forget, John F. Kennedy. I'm sure you've heard of this. He wanted to end. He was the real last true president. He wanted to end the Federal Reserve. He even got AIPAC, which was the Israel lobby at the time, which is the Israel lobby, to register as a foreign entity. And look what happened. For him trying to do that, he got killed. If Trump was to do that, if Trump was to come out and said, right, AIPAC, you're signing as a foreign entity, he would get shot. he would get killed. The
Yes.
same thing. So John F. Kennedy, if you think about it, was the last true president. You know, ever since, well, not the last true president. I would say America has not been a constitutional republic since 1930 because the Federal Reserve Act turned it into corporation.
Mhm.
But we did have one president from 1913 to now who was the true president, and that was John F. Kennedy. But ever since then, all of them have been puppets. So yeah.
Carter tried to break out of that, so I think he needs some plus points. But of course, yeah, ultimately, you know, the president, he doesn't have all the power. You know, who's behind them, who's financing them, who's paying for them. You know, I think Dulles is a very interesting character. I think a lot of the damage was done by him, and now the people in power seem to be his little babies, his descendants.
So, Anna, before we go, sorry I have to say this again, repeat myself, I'm a bit tired. But before we go, is there anything else you would like to say, Anna, before we go?
It's taken us a long time to get here, Welsh, but I'm glad. It's been very nice talking to you. I think New Zealand has a lot to be proud of. I mean, I think of, you know, Jacinda Ardern, how she behaved during COVID. She bucked the pressure that was being put on her. You know, I hope New Zealand can keep it up. And I hope to chat again with you, you know, soon. We'll see, you know, after the inauguration in January, who knows what it's.
Before we go, where can people find you, Anna?
AnnaChen.co.uk. That's my website, and there's a load of stuff. I mean, there's like over 2 decades worth of material there, both arts and politics, cultural response, political analysis. And on Twitter, Anna Chen Miao, MIAOW. But my account there is being throttled. Or on Blue Sky, I'm on there, Anna Chen. I think I'm the first Anna Chen on there, so I think it's just Anna Chen on Blue Sky. And yeah, I hope. Are you on there, Welsh?
Yep, I'm on Twitter. I'm not Blue Sky. I don't use Blue Sky.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe you might have to, because X is, you know, basically doubling down on its suppression of accounts, so you might end up having to do that. So, well, thank you very much for having me on.
It was a pleasure having you, Anna. And I just want to thank you again for coming on, Anna. And I just want to say to everybody, remember to go check out Anna's stuff. Give her the like and subscribe she deserves. Go and check out the great work she does. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day. Take care. Stay safe. Remember to like and subscribe and to share this video. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.